one more. It's interesting 7 and 8 are written. It's written if you come up with a different, maybe the flood did, or maybe there was more on, maybe there was, the Bible leaves no space for anything other than the flood story. The size is given. This can't be allegory. These are the facts. This is how it happened. And matter of fact, so much so we've worked on it a week, and then we're just going to read through the chapter. But does anybody know where we left off?
I think we got all the way.
We did.
Because I remember in verse kind. And then we read through the. They didn't.
Okay. Did went that.
I know we went to 20.
Okay. See, the good thing, if we got no 6. And the chapter 7 we read. We didn't, stop and study it. And, so now studied it, but there's still not a lot I know in there. But we're going to talk about the flood today. I'm going to show you a video, and it's going to be 20 minutes long. Off all the to cut off a minute and a half. I cut off all the stuff. Took it 29 down to 20, and go ahead and state all the things that are going to be on there. I scoured through answers to Genesis, is Genesis history, some other places, and all their things, they get specific in their videos. We're going to spend an hour and 45 talking about radioisotopes. 50 talking about the fossils. We're going to hour and 50 talking about, sit here and listen to a presentation on radioisotopes 2 hours. But the one video, and I had it queued up somewhere. I don't know where I have it queued up. I don't remember. But I spent at least an hour trying to look for it. What I did is it talked to different fossil beds that are mostly throughout the Midwest of our country, and how and they show pictures. That's what I should have done, is brought you the picture. There's a picture of this lit entrance, and as you walk in, there's a rock that's behind glass, and it is just absolutely packed full of dinosaur fossils. And it's interesting that the point being made is you don't have millions of animals just laying down and dying at once unless something happened quickly. So what I did is I ended up finding a video that's a little less scientific, but I think gets the point across in maybe a little bit more sarcastic and showy way. I'm fine with that, because hey, it's me, right? But some evidences of the flood, I got 6 of them here for you that I got off another video that I wasn't going to, I didn't want to cut down too much, but there's marine creatures of fossils in mountains. You get to the highest mountains of the Alps, and there are still fossils, and marine fossils up that high. And how would they get there? Except for the flood. There's number 2, rapidly buried plants and animals. If you look at plant fossils, it's interesting that all the fossils they show you, leaves are, the plant looks healthy, and the plant is alive. If it happens quickly and it's wet, because there's something about us, and getting all this from cells that or things, the videos I watched today. Plant cells are different than human cells in that each one contains the moisture inside of it, and then it has to be wet in order for it to have the tension to make the plant stand and then make the leaves as flat as possible. When you throw a live leaf into water, it will flatten out even more. If you throw a dead leaf into it, nothing happens. It's already dead. It's already dried up and withered. So when you see those, that's just part of what I watched today. But you have rapidly buried plants and animals. Some of them are eating. There are fossils that you see. Matter of fact, one of them's a fish, and it has another fish in its mouth half swallowed. So how does a water animal get buried quickly in something? And so sediments happen. There are animals in the geological record that are giving birth, and there's even a jellyfish. How do you fossilize a jellyfish? You don't, unless there's something quick and catastrophic. Number 3, there's rapidly laid sediment layers that match all over the world. I can bring maps. Matter of fact, this video might be one that has maps. And it just talks about how these certain layers match all around the globe. Now, it may be, 3/4 of North America has this, and then parts of Australia, parts of that continent, whatever. It's not that it's all the same all the way across the world. It's, this section, and it does match over there, and it matches over there with this section. Is there a reason we're off on that? What's up now?
Internet.
Seriously?
It's unclear on there, but it's clearing up.
So does that video then also catch the phone in it too? Nice. That's professional. I gotta figure that thing out. And quality's turned down. Oh well. What did I just say? Okay, rapidly laid sediment layers that match all over the world. Rule number 4, long transport distances of sediments. And you can find, there's a certain type of rock, and they found them in Alberta, Canada, that were from Idaho, and also, because they were beaten up so much, they're round rocks, but it's all over the place. So number 6, you find between cinders. That's going to be covered a little bit in this video that we're going to watch. And then number 6, layer sequences that are laid in quick succession. When you go to, I can remind you of the video that we did about Mount St. Helens, and he walks through the canyon, and it looks like those formed over millions of years, formed in 2 days. And saw it happen, 1980, right? Layers sequences in quick succession. Like when you're looking at, let's say, the Grand Canyon, you see the different layers. If it was millions of years of stuff being laid down there, you'd see erosion between the layers. There's just no evidence of that. And then my question became, okay, so then how does the flood account for the layers? To me, the flood accounts for the canyons, but how does it account for the layers that exist? And the video that I chose actually has that answer. And so that's why I chose that one. All right, so then going through chapter 7, we talked about the breath of life, because I was wondering, the whole ecosystem had to have been destroyed somehow, but then dolphins and whales still had to have been able to breathe, and I don't know how that happened. So, it's something I didn't think about till yesterday, or last week. Anything about penguins, Dan, on this one? We're good?
Not that I have planned yet.
Okay. If you do, let me know.
Well, there's still be some sort of oxygen for Noah and them to breathe.
Well, that's why I'm saying that the ark was sealed with pitch. That's just what I believe. But then having dolphin, it was sealed, they could open it. Anyways, I don't know. But then the ammonia, I guess there's bats in there and everything. And there's probably a sewage system in the ark, and aqueducts and all sorts of things, except water purification systems.
Well, I'm just saying, having that much oxygen available for 150 days or whatever, is that what they were?
Yeah, plants, exchanging.
From what sun?
What?
I'm not trying to put holes in your thing, I'm just saying there has to be oxygen getting to them somehow.
Yeah, somehow. Alright, anything else? You're supposed to ask your husband the questions at home after.
He goes to sleep.
Let's start first.
Everybody go to first grade. Especially back there.
The captain's open.
Like I said, he pays the bills, you get to sleep on the couch.
I make the bed, so I get to sleep in bed.
Whatever. Making the bed makes no sense to me, I don't make the bed for the same reasons I don't tie my shoes when I put them back, I do make the bed, by the way, just sometimes.
Why would you untie them?
'cause I need them off my foot. These do not slip off. Work boots don't slip off either, do they? Oh, those do. You're old. Can we get to the Bible study now? Alright. So Dan says we got to at least 23, and every living substance was destroyed, which is upon the face of the earth, the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him on the ark. And waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. I want to point out one thing here. I'm not sure if this is on this video. The language apparently in this chapter suggests that it's possible that the ark actually did not make it off the ground until day 40. I mean, there's floodwaters, but enough to bear it up that I don't know where and how to verify that, so I'm not even really concerned about it. So, and then chapter 8, I printed chapter 7 twice, so hopefully we don't get too far on this. All right, y'all ready for this guy? He's not much to look at. He doesn't look like a scientist. But this will be 20 minutes. And you all can vouch for this one to your kids. Anything else? Remember when you used to go to class, and when you got into class, the teacher had the TV set up, the TV and the VCR, and you're like, man, this is awesome. And you never realized that it was probably they thought it was awesome as well. But
I always asked if we could turn the lights off so I could go to sleep.
yeah. And when they brought in the projector, the sound of the projector with the lights off.
Oh, so they go to sleep. Yeah.
Did you ever fall asleep on a military plane?
Yeah.
Oh man, those things put you out.
Yeah. Some of them.
Okay, I've only been on once. You won't forget once, you know.
Stress. Yeah.
You don't want to get on with the lesson either, do you? All right. So the thing I'm hoping on this is it doesn't skip, and if it does start skipping, I don't know. Most of the good information is right at the beginning, though, which showed you anyways when it talks about how the layers got there. But y'all ready?
Ready.
20 minutes. Do you want me to turn off the lights?
Just the front.
See if I can get this thing
Yeah,
going.
where you are.
Yeah. Just
We continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and giving glory to our Creator while doing it. God did not say, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy mindlessness," but rather we here at Genesis Week believe God gave you a brain for a reason, and we want to use our brains to find the truth. Cyberspace, just punch in wazoo.com or genesisweek.com. You will find us, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get extras like Crevo rants and interviews with our guests. I'm your host, Ian Juby. It can be quite an educational surprise to find out what probably is the most contentious story in the Bible. It's not what you would expect. It wasn't the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. It's not even the story that's the foundation and primary focus of this show, the creation account. The account that has caused the most debate and arguing in history has been the flood of Noah. Even Discovery Channel has taken on the debate. Now we must first address what it is exactly that the Bible says in order to assess the flood account. For example, a documentary on Discovery Channel claimed that Noah's flood was just a local flood. Well, let's dispel this myth right off the bat. Why would Noah spend at least 100 years of his life building a 450-foot long ship, collecting 2 of every animal, when all he had to do to escape the flood was climb the nearest hill? He had 100 years to get to higher ground. Secondly, the Bible tells us that the highest mountain was covered by at least 15 cubits of water. So in either case, it was a miracle. Either it was a worldwide flood, or it was a local flood that was higher than the highest mountain. So, the biblical account of the flood of Noah shows that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And it's significant that it would appear that Noah's Ark did not float until the 40th day. At the 2003 International Conference on Creationism, Barrick and Sigler analyzed the Hebrew in chapter 7 and the verb sequence of verses 15 to 18 to give a compelling sequence that Noah's Ark did not start floating until the 40th day. This is significant in that most anti-creationists trying to argue against a worldwide flood try to depict Noah's flood as happening overnight, if you will. Now, this is not the case, and its significance will become evident in a moment. The waters continued to rise with Noah's Ark coming to rest on Mount Ararat on the 150th day. All the mountains under all the heavens were covered by at least 15 cubits of water. Now, that would be around 7 meters or 22 feet of water higher than the highest mountains at the time. Everything on the face of earth that breathed the breath of life was destroyed. This was not a local flood. Now, obviously, we're not underwater now. So the water receded about 150 days later. This recession event is more significant than people realize, as it would have been the receding floodwaters that carved the major canyons, for example. Now, presently, our oceans rise and fall twice a day. Why? The moon and sun pulling on the water, causing tides. So let us ask, would we have tides during a global flood? Well, the answer is yes. In fact, if anything, the tides would have been larger. Right now, our tides stop because the tidal wave hits land. But if the land is submerged, then the tides get bigger and bigger. A resonance develops, and as was modeled by my good friend, the late Professor M.E. Clark, and his student Henry Voss. So the water encroaching upon the land would have taken weeks to months before the highest points were finally submerged. Now, as this water continually rises, it also has superimposed upon it tidal waves twice a day. So, the flood starts, and our first tidal wave hits land, laying down a layer of mud. Now, where the dirt came from is a 1-hour lecture. I won't get into it today. Now, during low tide, the water regresses. Because the water is rising, the next tidal wave is higher than the last, so it lays down a layer of mud on top of the last. During low tide, it regresses. The next tidal wave is higher still, lays down another layer of mud on top of the others, and then low tide sets in. Now, during low tides, you'll have things like dinosaurs walking out on these freshly made tidal flats, trying to get to higher ground, foraging for food, etc. You'll also have people walking around, trying to get to higher ground, etc. Now, all of these creatures will be making footprints in the freshly laid mud, which then gets covered up by another layer of mud from the next tidal wave. Now, during the horrible tsunami of Indonesia in 2004, we learned a lot of things. For example, we learned that one wave can produce multiple layers of sediment. So if there has been a global flood, we should see layers of mud, now hardened into rock, all over the world. This is precisely what we see, and thus we see the first evidence of Noah's flood that I'm sure every person viewing this program has seen. Now, of course, some of these rock layers that we find throughout the world, some evolutionary geologists have contended could not have been laid down by a flood. For example, the Coconino sandstones in Grand Canyon. Now, this is one of the more prominent vertical cliff faces in Grand Canyon, a bright white rock, but when you take a close look at it, it has a highly unusual formation called crossbedding. Now, I'm going to show you pictures of a different formation called the Navajo sandstone because it is brightly colored so you can see the crossbedding better. Within the Navajo, you see the rock layers, but each of these rock layers is composed of these sloped layers called crossbeds. The crossbeds are composed of a top curve called the top set, the slope called the foreset, and the bottom curve that levels out called the bottom set. It is claimed that these are fossil sand dunes from a desert. Now, obviously, we have a problem. If the layers we see in Grand Canyon were laid down by a worldwide flood in 1 year, you cannot have a desert right smack dab in the middle of it all, right? But are these desert dunes? When you actually see the cross-section of a desert dune, it has layers in it that look like crossbeds, but actually the layers conform to the shape of the dune. At White Sands, New Mexico, some of the dunes have crossbedding, but this crossbedding is partly cemented, and actually the winds are destroying these crossbeds, not making them. Furthermore, when we take a look at those cross-bedded layers of the Coconino sandstone, we find fossil footprints. Lots and lots of them. They were made from what appeared some kind of lizard or amphibian. Now, there are a number of unusual characteristics of these fossil footprints. For instance, there is no tail drag markings. Now, everyone believes these creatures had a tail, so why did the tail leave no markings in the sand? One logical explanation would be because the sands aren't in a desert, but were underwater and the animal's tail is being buoyed up by the water. This would also explain the fact that the trails of fossil footprints almost always go only uphill, and many of the trails crab track as if the animal was fighting a flow of water trying to walk uphill. Now, in a short distance, the footprints will go from very deep to shallower to claws only to completely disappearing. Did the animal grow wings and fly away? None of this makes sense within the model of desert dunes. However, it makes complete sense if the crossbedding was made underwater. Professor Clark, engineer Andrew Rodenbeck, and myself were conducting experiments in a flume at Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose.
That was a short 20
We
minutes.
tilted the flume uphill and forced the water to go uphill. The sediments dropped out in the form of crossbeds. It turns out all that needed was standing water. The flow coming in is moving fast enough to pick up and carry the dirt, but when it hits the standing water, it comes to a stop, can no longer hold the sand, and it drops it, much like a continually lengthening conveyor belt. We had Dr. Carl Baugh, director of the museum, get us some amphibians from the pet store, some newts. We placed those in the flume while producing crossbeds and wound up mimicking exactly what we see in the Coconino sandstones. The amphibians tended to recluse themselves to the bottom set as there was an eddy there. To escape, the newts would walk uphill. They would be picked up by the water and swept away. Often they would be swept right back to the bottom set again by the currents. But the clincher came in the form of a presentation at the 2009 Geological Society of America conference by Chung et al. The researchers found dolomite and ooids all throughout the Coconino sandstone. Dolomite and ooids are formed in water, not a desert. So the biblical catastrophe model explains huge formations like the Coconino sandstone far better than any model involving deserts and deep time. But we're taught in school that the rock layers we see around the world are the result of deep time. Millions of years of slow sediment accumulation produced rock layers that we see around the world. Now, there are so many reasons to deny this story that it's difficult to know where to begin, but one easy to understand evidence is polystrate fossils. Polystrate is a term used to describe fossils that are found cutting through multiple rock layers. Poly for many, straight for the strata of rock that it cuts through. Polystrate fossils are literally found all over the world. Joggins, Nova Scotia is probably the most famous example. Now, at any given time, you can usually see 50 polystrate fossils in the fossil cliffs. The fossils there are trunks of giant hollow reeds known as lycopods and chelymaides. Now, obviously, the top of the plant is not going to stick around while the plant gets slowly buried over even tens of years, let alone thousands or millions, right? So obviously, these layers did not even take tens of years to be laid down, let alone thousands or millions. In fact, this one particular trunk was buried on an angle, which is even more profound evidence that these layers were laid down in rapid succession. Now, this scenario fails to fit the facts on many levels. For example, here we see a fossil root from one of the lycopods. At each of those dimples, a rootlet radiated out from the root. Now, you can see the rootlets in the surrounding rock. Yet, here is one of the stumps at Joggins. Let's take a close-up look at the roots. Notice something missing. The rootlets have been stripped off. Obviously, this plant was ripped up, transported by water, and buried where it now is. It is evidence of catastrophe, not deep time. This stump was buried upside down. Now, last I checked, plants don't grow very well upside down. There were dozens of these upside-down polystrate stumps at a coal mine in Alberta. The Joggins fossil cliffs are a mute testament to the greatest catastrophe the world has ever seen. Close to 18,000 vertical feet of rock layers that were obviously laid down in real short order. The layers that do not have polystrate trunks cutting through them are identical to the ones that do. There is no deep time involved here. I go into more detail in my chapter on the Joggins fossil cliffs in the book Rock Solid Answers, available through the Creation Research Society. However, the most powerful evidence of Noah's flood probably comes from the incredible erosion that happened as the floodwaters left the land. All around the world, we find strange features that cannot be explained by present-day processes or deep time, but are explained beautifully within the model of a global flood. We find hundreds of water gaps around the world. A water gap is a canyon that was cut by water through a mountain, but the water could have gone around the mountain. Grand Canyon is probably the most famous example of a water gap. It cuts through the Colorado uplift, where it could have gone around the uplift. Now, here in the Rattlesnake Mountains of Wyoming, we see a textbook case of a water gap. A hydroelectric dam was built in the canyon, but yet when you look at the canyon from behind, you see that it has been cut right through the mountain. Yet if you turn to the right, you can see that the water could have gone around the mountain. In fact, when engineers constructed the dam inside the canyon, they had to build a dam at the side of the mountain to keep the water from going around it. Geology experts have noted this weird anomaly that cannot be explained. Experts who have studied these water gaps have acknowledged that these gaps cannot be explained. Visiting Grand Canyon, we're both mighty Colorado River, Grand Canyon. Even standing on the shores of the Colorado River, it's not that big. And the fact that the river would have had to climb thousands of vertical feet before it started cutting the canyon tells you there's problems with the theories involving deep time. However, if there is a worldwide flood, the water is starting above the mountains. And as it picks up speed in the land, it will cut through anything in its path, including the mountains, even if it could go around the mountain. Planation surfaces are another profound evidence of a worldwide flood. A chunk of the mountains on the eastern seaboard of Canada have had their tops planed off flat. Back to Joggins again, you can see the results of slow and steady erosion over the time, as the tides whittle away at the rocks. Now, the rocks that are rocks wind up jutting up out of the water. Now, this is called the differential erosion. The rocks erode differently. However, take a look at the top of the cliffs. Notice that the same rock layers have been cut off flat. So flat you can stick a ruler on it. There's only one thing that can do that: extremely fast moving water. Water moving so fast that rock hardness did not matter. The East Coast Planation starts in Nova Scotia to the southwest of Cape Breton Highlands. Now, if you can get a good viewing spot, you'll notice that the Cape Breton Highlands are actually a planation surface. They've been planed off flat. Turning around and looking towards Newfoundland, you see the same thing. If you go over to Newfoundland, you'll notice that the mountains there too are planed flat at the same elevation. It's the same planation surface. If you head up to the Northern Peninsula, all the mountains have been planed off flat. If you head up into Labrador, if the mountain reaches that critical elevation, it's planed flat. This planation surface is huge. It hits the highest elevation around the Corner Brook area, but averages around the 500-meter elevation. Only one thing could do this: extremely fast moving water. Glaciers would not do this, as glaciers by definition flow downhill and carve gouges, not planation surfaces. But in order to cut this rock without being influenced by rock hardness means the water would have had to have been flowing in sheets, moving many tens of kilometers an hour. Quick guess, at least 40 kilometers per hour, bare minimum. This wall of water stretched for over 800 kilometers wide or wider. Now, we watched in horror as tsunamis hit Indonesia in 2004 and Japan in 2011. The massive wall of water moving across the landscape, causing tremendous damage, and yet that water may have hit 25 or 30 kilometers per hour. So how fast was the water that cut the mountains of eastern Canada? Well, to answer this, we'll head to the mountains of western Canada. The Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park straddles the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. The mountain has also been planed off flat, about 1,000 meters in elevation. But the planation surface is covered in rounded rocks made of an extremely hard rock called quartzite. The rocks have circular hammer marks all over them. The rocks were obviously picked up by water and hammered against each other as they were being carried along. But the rocks that the water would have had to have been moving a minimum of 110 kilometers an hour. Now, here's the other thing. These rocks didn't come from Alberta. They came from at least 800 kilometers away in Idaho. The rocks probably made that trip in under 10 hours. A wall of water 1,000 meters above sea level, picking up rocks in Idaho, transporting them to Alberta at speeds exceeding 110 kilometers an hour is a global flood. This simply cannot be explained any other way. The evidence for a worldwide flood is profound and overwhelming. The evidence is all around you. You just need to know what to look for. Lastly, when we take a look around the world, we see hundreds of stories, legends, and myths of a worldwide flood in virtually every culture in the world. This is also profound evidence that a great flood did occur within the memory of mankind. One example of one of these flood legends is found on the back of the Canadian $20 bill, an artist's rendition of the Inuit story of Noah and the Ark. This is only one of hundreds of similar stories. Some have suggested that the biblical account of a worldwide flood was actually just copied from the Epic of Gilgamesh, because the Epic of Gilgamesh is older than the Bible. Now wait a minute. Even if it is older, so what? We have literally hundreds of accounts of a massive flood all over the world. The Epic of Gilgamesh is only one of hundreds. Now, if you had seen a report of an event in various newspapers that all reported a similar story, but one newspaper came out before the rest, would you assume that the other newspaper simply copied the first? Well, of course not. Secondly, the account of the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh has fatal flaws. The boat, as described, is a cube and clearly not seaworthy. Yet, models of Noah's Ark, based on the dimensions provided in the Bible, statement.
Alright, well, sorry about that, Skippy, we need to figure that out. And like I said, he isn't the most scientific guy. But, and I'm sorry I repeated some of that, I watched a whole heap of video trying to and I did watch this one twice, and then repeated some of it, so sorry about that. But, again, didn't want to spend the extra time on the other videos, and especially having us just coming in to watch videos the entire time. So I want to cover this, show you that again. Remember, we're going to start talking about the post-flood world, and so hopefully this made sense to you. We're going to talk also about people, we go from Adam and Eve, then we go to, then bottlenecks of the flood. So here we would have Noah and his wife. We would have 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and then we would have added in the 3 wives who may not necessarily be of those, because we're now many, many years separated from creation when we get to the flood. And so then people would then go in different directions after the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel explains why we have different skin color, why we have different languages, different shapes, different everything. And all that will be explained in the next couple weeks. I said that like it was the last thing I was going to say, and I got your hopes up. Yes?
If there's like evidence of other like fossils and plants and stuff, is there any like bodies, humans and stuff?
I've heard that is a question that was asked and answered, but I don't remember the answer, and I can't find the video again. It's one of those, why there aren't many humans found, and I don't have an answer to that one at all. So gummy bears there, and then when you talk about languages and their procession, we know this is how people left that central part of the world and went out from there. This one just gives more time to it, but we already know that the area where the mountains of Ararat down to the Tower of Babel, from there is where everybody branched out. This is human history. We know this. We look at something like that and don't think twice about it. And so it's just kind of interesting. We'll cover that as well. Let's go back over. We'll go ahead and read through chapter 8. I think we've covered everything in chapter 8. My notes didn't have anything spectacular in there. And then that will put us at chapter 9. So when you get to chapter 9, we'll talk about the Noah, the covenant of Noah, and then chapter 10, genealogy, and then chapter 11, we'll start getting the Tower of Babel and talk about that. So let's go here to chapter 8. God remembered Noah and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. See, where it says, and God remembered Noah, that's part of where I thought that maybe, there wasn't much that's happened there on the boat supernatural, but it could have, who knows. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain in the heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off of the earth continually, and that's now going to talk about the rain cycle. Ecclesiastes talks about the rain cycle. Psalm 104 talks about how all this happened. Now remember, the flood ruined the earth as well. When we say ruined the earth, that's what we get from chapter 6. The earth was destroyed as well, just not the earth in general, just the topography. You want to talk about continents and where they fit and all this sorts of neat stuff. We'll talk about that in the next couple chapters. So here you have now return from off the earth continually. Verse 3 now talks about the rain cycle. The ark rested on the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Those are now in the area of Turkey, if you assume that the mountains of Ararat are still the same place. Because remember, the Bible mentions 4 rivers in the Garden of Eden, but they all come from the same source. Those aren't necessarily, I don't think the Euphrates and the Tigris are the same ones that you find in the Garden of Eden. Just like when somebody goes from one country to another, we have a New England. We come here, we have a Springfield, but there's also 36 other Springfields in the United States. Of course, this one was named because there was a spring in a field that Elias Briggs found, I believe was his name, back when they were running the ferry across the Willamette River. Does anybody else want to verify that? I think my memory serves me correctly there. And there was a spring. But anyways, so when you get off the boat and all of a sudden you get to a new river, what are you going to name it? You're probably going to name it just like the old one. New York, New Amsterdam, Portland, more than one of those, and you would name them after familiar things. Verse 6, it came to pass at the end of the 40 days, now that's that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro until the waters dried up from off the earth. And so a raven, would land on dead bodies, not think anything of it. And also he sent forth a dove from him, so a dove wouldn't do the same, to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, that the raven did, because remember, dead bodies. And she entered unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he went forth with it. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her into the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and again he took forth the dove out of the ark. That shows you he's a man of patience. I would send it out the next day, next hour, who knows. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. So which means that olive tree and plants do and can survive underwater, and they do all the time. And these ones, I don't know if it's the same exact ones or they regrew, whatever the case is. And he stayed yet another 7 days and sent forth a dove, which returned not again unto him anymore, because then it was able to find a place to live and go. And it came to pass after the 601st year, in the first month, and the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, the earth dried. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and cattle, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his daughter, and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar, so that, that if he wasn't eating animals on the ark, that also tells you why he had 7, now you have 6. But I'm not sure what the diet was on that, or not. So, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I again smite any more everything that is living as I have done. There is an exception to that coming up. First time by fire, but he will destroy everything, well, almost everything by fire. While the earth remained, now watch this, so now, getting back to the canopy theory, when I say I believe in canopy theory, if you go look up canopy theory online, you're going to find a bunch of goofy stuff. I just believe that the earth had a protective canopy, the temperature was constant, the UV rays would be blocked, consistent humidity, all that stuff going on. So now, and remember, if you believe like I do, the lights in the firmament would tell you what season it was. Now, verse 22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So now we have seasons. Now the earth gets colder in some places, hotter in some places. Now you have rain. Sometimes you have places with no rain, and all this stuff now matters because of verse 22. All right, let's go down to chapter 9, verse 8. I want to cover this one last thing. I believe it fits in here. And God spake unto Noah and his sons, saying, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. Why would this be important? If it didn't rain before, and if we had a protective canopy, there would be no direct sunlight that would cause a rainbow. Now, you could make the argument that there were probably still rainbows, but I don't think without direct sunlight that there were. If you think there weren't, you think there were before, but I think the significance of this is now that the lack of direct sunlight before, now all of a sudden you have sunlight, all of a sudden you have rain, you have clouds, you have a completely different atmosphere, so now the first rainbow is going to be seen. I don't think it would mean that, I don't think that God established the prism and the quantum mechanics and physics that would cause light to split at this time, because I think there's some people that teach that. This didn't start happening that way until that. I don't think that God changed something here in physics. I think it's just that direct sunlight wasn't a thing before this on the earth, and neither was rain, although there would have been a mist from the ground, and if that be the case, there would be a rainbow everywhere you turned, and but with the protective canopy, that direct sunlight wouldn't be as pronounced. And that's my opinion based on those verses.
Wouldn't the canopy split the light from the sunlight? Wouldn't the canopy come back as a prism?
It could, but if it did, then to me the rainbow in chapter 9 doesn't make as much sense.
Well, I mean,
The
it
new
would have been a
color.
rainbow as in a rainbow like we see it now, but.
Yeah, and that might tie into where some people, okay, like when we talk about canopy theory, there's some people who say, well, the sky was like a pinkish and all this sorts of neat stuff. And just like if we tried to say too much about what was happening in the ark, then those things about the ark would get shot down. When I say I believe in canopy theory, one time my pastor looked at me goofy, and looked at him like, what, you don't? And he says, so you believe, and he rattled off all these different things. I'm like, I've never even heard of any of that. And I said, I believe that the earth had a canopy, protective canopy. He's like, okay, well, yeah, so do I. Okay, then what were you even talking about? And so I just think that the protective canopy, sunlight wasn't in there as much, and that makes the rainbow now significant. However, if I'm wrong on that, I'm perfectly okay with being wrong on that. but that's my opinion based on chapter 9.
I was gonna.
You're scratching your chin, Dan.
Yeah, they,
Here we go.
when we were talking
There's
about
no penguins on the ark.
on the ark, eating, bowel movements, things like that, you have, prior to the flood, the canopy, which I'm more of a believer on now than before. And life was longer, lifespan was longer, so that means that because lifespan was longer, the degradation of life was less, meaning probably less stress on the body, meaning do you burn less calories before? Was eating a once every week event? You know, we live in the now where we eat 3 to 4 times a day on average. But as you go look back in time, it was real common just not that long ago, 1 meal a day. And so prior to the flood, was food requirement different? Was calorie burning different? Was all that different? If it was, when they went on the ark, you know, maybe they didn't need as much food as we think, like we would need now. And
That's a great
same with
point.
the animals. So,
And our body's probably processing a lot different too.
yeah. And I'm
See,
sure that
that's
the
why you got your
bodies
girl,
were
never thought of that.
efficient at that time. So that's why I think there is a possibility that supernatural might not have been in play.
That's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that one. Makes sense though. Yeah. Because, I mean, just like the video we talked about, the earth was a different place before the flood. You know, where was the Garden of Eden? Well, we say now it was in the Middle East. We don't know. It might have been in Springfield. Who knows?
Dexter,
Yeah, Dexter. Why Dexter?
because that's the least place they would be. Come on now. Come on, we all know that's true.
Dude, how far are you from Dexter?
5 minutes.
Ron? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Man, now you're just digging on Chris.
The hometown.
Booming metropolis of Dexter. And, but you know, when we're talking about the flood, and it talks about the water over the mountains. I believe it was over Everest, but I just don't believe that Everest was that tall. You know, all the crushing weight of all that water on our continents and the drainage and the upheaval. I believe in a continental sprint, not a continental drift. But that's something we can all argue in another time. So then that continental sprint, you know, that would count for some mountains, I guess, and shove some things up in the air, I guess. But, you know, again, I'm not a geologist, I don't play one on TV, so those are just ideas and my opinions based on what I read in scripture, but I don't know if that's how it really happened. I know what the Bible says is true, but then after that, getting details. Like what he said about, you know, the layers before the, you know, as the flood's gaining. I never thought of that before. It makes sense. Because I always thought, you know, I always took like the Grand Canyon, that those things were all eroded, and that made the canyon. But at the same time, sediments would have had to have been laid because there are fossils in those sediments. So then how'd those get there in the first place? And that had to have been a flood, then to be subsequently washed away on the drainage into the ocean. Makes sense to me. Yes.
So is he saying it was basically like a huge ocean and the tides were acting like they would act in a huge ocean because of how much water was there and that's
You ever
why
seen the movie Interstellar?
fast? Yeah.
Remember when they landed on that planet and then every
Yeah.
20 minutes was 7 years? And there was just all covered with water, these huge tidal waves were coming, is because they were going around it. I hate to use a movie, if you've never seen Interstellar, what a great movie. And, but no, I'm just kidding. But so, I'm using that as an illustration. If the whole earth would have been covered with water, it only makes sense that then the tidal, you know, forces that we have in play now would be even greater. That's something I didn't even think of until that video. And so, now that brings tidal waves into the whole mix and fast-moving water. And you can have, you know, very fast-moving water underneath and an arc on top that, you know, isn't moving all
I
that
never
fast.
thought of it either. I just thought of rain coming down.
Yeah, and just flood, it just stays.
Flat
But
water.
now we're talking about it elongating and then, you know, going over in a systematic way. I just, cool thought I never thought of. Anything else? That's good. And this just, the more we go into this, and you think you can get something like this simple figured out, you just find out there's more details that you don't know. And, so, more studying to do, and, or on some things, you just go ahead and let it go. But, any other questions? Statements? Statements to the contrary, arguments, disagreements? Nothing? Alright, so, as Chris mentioned, during his prayer, mentioned the Lord about the, Lord's Supper Sunday morning night, looking forward to that. It's always a good time, a sweet time for us, so looking forward to that, looking forward to your being here with us for that.
Are we in Sunday school that day? I don't know, just making sure.
When's time change?
First day of November. November first, the weekend before.
And so we are falling back, you get an extra hour of sleep, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't try to trick, remember I gave you last year off.
Yeah, but we didn't take it for the time change in
This
spring.
spring.
We forgot, remember, so.
Jackie,
Right, but we always do that because we do a potluck at the end, and we're not doing a potluck right now.
No, it's good.
So you want Sunday school off for,
I'm just saying, you didn't do it for the other time change.
We,
You were supposed to.
I thought we were in COVID in the other time.
yeah, we weren't even meeting for church during that.
Well, what
So
was
we
it?
still missed, we didn't have Sunday school.
What was it that?
Are you, it's up to us.
We had Sunday school for something, and you looked the day before, looked the day after, and you saw that you had wrote no Sunday school. What was that for?
What's that, baptism?
Was it Fourth of
Yeah,
July?
that was when we goofed up the
Was it Fourth of
time
July?
change, wasn't it? Last year. I think that was a year ago.
It was something just recent.
Or do you want to cancel Sunday school this week? Nope, alright. He's got a class, that's the only time it's the teens. He's got a class to teach. What?
They need it.
Yeah, they do. Alright, let's go ahead and pray, we'll be dismissed. And